Okay, a really big change is on the horizon for SNAP, which, is the country's biggest food assistance program. If you or someone you know relies on these benefits, you absolutely need to understand what's coming down the pike. So let's break it all down. What do these new work requirements really mean?
2.4 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That's how many people the Congressional Budget Office estimates are going to be affected by these new SNAP rules over the next 10 years. We're talking about a huge number of people.
Yep, all those people are going to be impacted because a new federal law is officially in effect. What does it do? Well, it expands the work rules for literally millions of Americans who count on SNAP to buy food for their families. This isn't some small tweak, folks. It's a major shift, and it's happening as we speak.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the big shift itself. Then we'll get into the details, like who exactly do these new rules affect and what are the requirements. We'll also cover the super important exemptions and deadlines. And we'll wrap up with a clear action plan so you know what your next steps should be.
Okay, let's dive right in. First up, the big picture. What is actually changing and why is this happening now?
So these new rules didn't just appear out of nowhere. They come from a federal law called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which was signed back in July of 2025. And the main point of this law was to expand the work requirements that were already on the books, making them apply to more SNAP recipients who, up until now, didn't have to meet them.
And listen, this is a really big deal because SNAP is just massive. We're talking about a program that helps almost 42 million Americans put food on the table. So you can imagine when you change the rules for a program that huge, the ripple effects are going to be felt everywhere.
All right, so that brings us to the most important question, right? Does this actually apply to you? Let's figure that out.
So under this new law, a bunch of groups that used to be exempt now have to meet these work requirements. We're talking about older adults, specifically those aged 55 to 64. It also includes parents whose youngest kid is 14 or older. And this is a really key point. The law also gets rid of exemptions that used to exist for veterans, people experiencing homelessness, and young adults who were formerly in the foster care system. Okay, let's just break down the two biggest changes side by side so it's super clear. First, the age limit. It used to be that these rules applied to folks up to age 54. Now, that's been pushed all the way up to age 64. Second, the rule for parents is different. It used to be if you had a child under 18, you were exempt. Now, that exemption only counts if your youngest child is under 14. That's a pretty big change. All right, so maybe you're thinking, okay, this might apply to me. The next obvious question is, what do I actually have to do? First things first, let's talk about an acronym you're going to see everywhere. ABAWD. It sounds kind of clunky, but it just stands for Able-Bodied Adults Without Dependents. That's the official government speak for people who are subject to these work rules and time limits. Seriously, getting familiar with this term is going to make dealing with all the notices and paperwork so much easier.
So what's the requirement? Well, the magic number here is 80. You need to do at least 80 hours of work-related activities every single month. But the good news is you've got options on how to hit that number. It could be 80 hours at a paid job, or it could be 80 hours in a qualifying work program, like job training or even volunteering. You can also mix and match, do 40 hours of work and 40 hours of training to get to your 80. There's also something called a workfare program you can participate in. Now, I know this flowchart might look a little intimidating at first glance, but there's a pretty clear logic to it. This is basically the roadmap state agencies follow. They use a step-by-step process to figure out who has to meet these rules. It's like a checklist. First, they see if you have a general exemption. If the answer is no, they move to the next step and check if you meet one of the specific exceptions for ABAWDs. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about two really, really important things: the exceptions to the rule and the deadlines. You're definitely going to want to pay close attention here. So, even with all these new expanded rules, it is so important to remember that there are still exemptions. Not everyone is going to be subject to this. So let's get really clear on who is still considered exempt. So who gets a pass? Well, people who can't work because of a physical or mental health issue. Also, anyone who is pregnant. And, like we said before, if you're taking care of a child who's under 14. Students who are enrolled at least half-time are also exempt, as are people in a drug or alcohol treatment program. If any of these situations sound like yours, you might not have to worry about these new work rules at all.
Okay, time to talk deadlines because the clock is ticking. The law was signed back in July 2025, and some states even started rolling it out last fall. But the really big date to circle on your calendar is February 1st, 2026. That's when these rules go into effect for pretty much everyone. For a lot of folks, that means you'll have until March 1st to get your proof submitted. And then, come May 1st, that's when people who haven't met the rules for 3 months will start to see their benefits cut off.
Okay, this brings us to what might be the most important part of this whole conversation. Let's talk about what you need to do. Let's build your action plan right now. Here's your to-do list, nice and simple. Number 1, update your contact info with your state agency. Make sure they have your current address and phone number. Number 2, watch your mailbox, your phone, and your online account like a hawk for official notices. 3, start gathering your paperwork now. We're talking pay stubs, letters from training programs, doctor's notes for an exemption, whatever you need. And finally, number 4, get in touch with your local agency. Rules can be a little different from state to state, so it's always best to get the details straight from the source. And I really can't stress enough why this is so urgent. Here's the bottom line. If these rules apply to you and you don't meet the requirements or get an exemption, you're looking at a strict time limit. You can only get SNAP benefits for 3 months in a 3-year period. After those 3 months are up, the benefits stop, period. You know, when you step back, this is so much more than just a paperwork change. It's really a fundamental shift in how food assistance works in this country. And that leaves us all with a pretty big question to think about. What's the real impact of this going to be on your friends, your neighbors, on your entire community?